this episode of Grief in Common, we mention suicide and talk about chronic illness, death, and grief throughout. Welcome back to the Grief in Common podcast. Today's episode is a special collaboration between Winston's Wish and the Teapot Trust. This podcast is a result of the collaboration and looks at our experiences of grief and chronic illness. My name's Beth, I'm 27 years old and I lost my best friend during my second year of university. And around the same sort of time, I discovered more chronic illnesses than the ones I went in with. And there was definitely a significant overlap for me.
Hi, I'm Ella, I'm 21 and I lost my best friend Hannah in 2023. She had similar chronic illnesses to me, so my grief and my chronic illness experiences are very interlinked.
In the last episode, we talked about our experiences of grief and what we'd say to people in the same situation as us. Today, we're thinking about our experiences in professional settings and with support networks, and in particular, thinking about what we'd say to those professionals, support networks, and any advice for you if you're currently going through it. To me, this feels like a very loaded topic, Ella. I don't know how you feel about this.
Yeah, it's heavy and it's a lot.
It's a lot. It's going to be a lot today, but it's fine. For me, I was chronically ill before my grief. We knew that it was a thing. And then about, maybe 3 months after I lost my friend, I started experiencing new symptoms, which were just immediately put down to stress and immediately put down to you're grieving, so you're stressed, so your body is reacting. And being away from home at uni, in a hospital, just constantly being told, oh no, this is just stress. That was quite a lot, as well as grief. Stress causes flares for so many of us, even if it's not new symptoms. It can be really hard to manage stress and your chronic illness.
Yeah, for me, I knew my friend when we were both going through a lot of hospital treatments, and then she slowly got sicker and she passed away, and the treatments that helped to get me better were ultimately what contributed to her death. So my experience of it is slightly different. So it's a bit of a complicated one, and I'm aware that it's not the most common situation, but I also know I'm not the only one in this situation. And actually, for talking about professionals as well, if you put young people who aren't in school, if you put them all in a ward together, they'll make friends with each other. And unfortunately, the reality of children's hospitals and that kind of thing is that you meet other people with similar conditions and some of them might pass away. So it's something that's definitely worth thinking about for medical professionals, that there will be more young people in my situation than you might have previously thought of. And Hannah was my best friend, but even if you just have known someone briefly, it can have a big impact on you, especially if you have similar illnesses or you've watched them at a time when they're really poorly. So it's definitely a really important topic, and it's something that I hope that can be addressed a bit better and the understanding can be a bit better around it.
Definitely. I think that was one thing I hope people take away from today. It's just a bit more of that understanding. Grief is really difficult. There are grown adults who don't know what to say to grown adults when they lose people. Like, grief doesn't have a rule book when you're the person going through it or the person watching someone going through it. And it's kind of inevitable that you're going to get it wrong at some point. But I think when you're a professional who is responsible for young people's health and mental health in particular, we're not expecting you to be perfect 100% of the time. You will make mistakes. That's being human. But I think it's really important to understand how everything is so much more interlinked than you might expect, and how getting it wrong can also be really difficult and have kind of longer lasting impacts than you might think. But similarly, getting it right can have longer lasting impacts than just that one conversation. Because I think for me, I was experiencing really scary symptoms when I was taken into hospital. And the first thing the consultant on the ward said to me was, "Oh, you're a student. Are you stressed?" And I was like, well, I don't think I'm unnaturally stressed given the situation. And my mum was there. She'd come down by that point, and she sort of said, "Oh, Beth lost her best friend 2-3 months ago," whatever it was. And they just immediately latched onto that. Like, that was then just everything to them. It was like, "Are you sure you're processing your grief?" I really think that once you get past this grief, these symptoms will clear to the point where they were not doing investigations. And I think that that's a really dangerous double-edged sword for 2 reasons. Because number one, grief does not go away. Your life builds around it. It sometimes gets smaller and like less intrusive on your day-to-day, but it doesn't go away. You don't stop missing that person. And it can hit you at completely random times. And the expectation that every time I missed my friend, I was going to have these really scary symptoms is not what you want to hear when you're sat in hospital 2 months after that event. It's like, oh, great, I just won't think of them then, will I? Because every time I do, this is what's going to happen. But the other thing is that there's kind of like an association built between that grief and not being listened to and not being taken seriously. And then it makes it really difficult to talk about that person in those settings, because if one professional has gone, "This person's grieving and can't cope with it," and that's what goes in the notes, it's all anyone wants to talk about, but it's also a really loaded conversation then. I don't think that people in that situation did it on purpose. I think they were trying to be helpful, trying to be reassuring, trying to be kind of, "We don't think there's any reason for you to be worried." But it's not less worrying when you're experiencing these terrifying symptoms to go, well, it'll be all right when your grief gets better. Because when is that?
Yeah, because grief isn't one of those things that just, as you said, it doesn't just go away. It doesn't have a time span. It's not just going to end one day. You're not going to wake up one day and you're over it. Trying to attribute physical symptoms to grief it's a lot. And I think we have, like, the grieving process is immensely stressful. Grief is, it's a kind of stress, but it's not the kind of stress that you can just remove from your life like other kinds of stress. It takes a lot of time.
Absolutely. And I think we're really sort of clear as people who have chronic illness, and we've said this in our conversations, that we're not denying that stress can cause flare-ups, because not chronically ill people can go through grief and end up catching every bug under the sun because their immune system's like, "I can't handle this level of stress," or get headaches all the time because they're stressed. Like, non-chronically ill people coming from a healthier baseline can absolutely have stress-related symptoms. But I think we know what our typical stress response is, and we know when that's not what's happening, and we know when something new or scary or worse than normal is going on.
The way in which grief made my physical symptoms worse was very different to my normal stress response as well. It was weird because it was spread out over a period of time. And then it came with, because of my situation, it came with a lot of, well, I don't want to interact with anybody. I don't want to talk to anyone about it. I was just fed up with medical stuff by that point. So actually, even at times when I was then really quite poorly, I didn't seek help because I was like, I don't want to interact with anybody, which again is not helpful. And that's the damage that kind of going, well, you're just grieving can do, because then people won't interact when they do actually need to. And I think a lot of this is about trust, and it's going to be a kind of trust that obviously if you're interacting with somebody and it's like a one-on-one basis, say for instance A&E, and it's like a one-time thing, it's not, you're not their GP, you're not one of their doctors who manages their conditions, it can be quite hard because you're getting a snapshot in time.
Generally speaking, as a medical professional, whether you're a long-term management person or a random person in A&E, you're seeing that person for maybe an hour-long appointment. For you, that's like one of 50 people you're going to see and talk to that day. And that conversation might not be something that you remember by the time you get home. But for that young person, you're going to be the medical professional they spoke to that day. And that will stick with them. That still sticks with me. Even now, I'm really hesitant to go and get medical help for new symptoms because I feel like they're just going to go, are you stressed? Someone else died? Is there something else going on here? And I'm like, that is really difficult to toe that line between when is this enough that I'm going to go and get help and risk putting myself in that situation again, knowing full well that for that person who created that association, they probably have not thought about it since, because for them that was one of 50 people they saw in a ward round. And I don't think that they meant to. I don't think that anyone walked into that room that day going, you know what, we're really going to mess with this young person's head. And like, I'm 5 or 6 years out from this happening now. I still have that impact. And that's after talking to professionals and having therapy and having grief support. And that's still a thing.
Yeah. I think a lot of what it boils down to is trust, and it's going to have to go both ways, that we want to be able to trust the medical professionals to say things that are going to help in the situation, and they need to trust us that when we say that, hey, this is not my normal, that is listened to. And that's really hard. But I guess if you're here listening to this, it's because you want to be that person who says that right thing. So thank you for wanting to do the right thing. So for me, some of my not so great experiences came from people not acknowledging the impact that my friend's death had on me. And because of the situation where we were going through a lot of similar treatments, the view that I had on those treatments and risks I was willing to accept. People not understanding how deep that impact went and going, well, that's not going to happen to you. That's not going to happen to you has been some of the worst words that people have said to me when discussing this stuff. But actually, some of my best experiences have been when people have just acknowledged that it was really difficult for me to watch that. And then me having to agree to stuff going forward has been really difficult because of that. And for me, the biggest thing was that acknowledgement and people recognizing that impact, and that my fears weren't completely unfounded, that I wasn't being hysterical or panicking about things that were worst case scenarios that would never happen, because I'd seen the worst case scenario happen. So yeah, actually it was so simple to just acknowledge the impact that it had had on me.
Absolutely. And I think acknowledging the impact while also acknowledging the difference between a mental impact and a physical impact. Because, like we've said, there can be so much interlink, but there can also be so much difference. And when you're in a situation like you had, where chronic illness and sort of that is tied up in your grief, maybe we should be believing this person when they say, yes, they're grieving, but also this is unusual and should be taken seriously. And things can overlap, but you're never going to know whether that would have happened anyway. And the doctors are never going to know whether that would have happened anyway. And I think that's a really difficult connection to make as well. Like, it left me feeling not resentful, I guess, but kind of, because that's what all the doctors are saying. If they hadn't died, I wouldn't be like this. So it's really difficult to separate that sort of grief for a person, for also grief for the life that you had before you were ill. It's really difficult for that not to have an impact on how you think about your grief. And that is not a helpful way to process grief at all. Because if you're trying to speed run it so that you can get better, because that's what they say, if you just when you stop grieving, your symptoms will go away. Speedrunning grief doesn't work. It doesn't. This is not Mario Kart. It's not first to the finish line. It doesn't work like that, no matter how much we might want it to.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, telling somebody, well, your physical symptoms are because you're grieving, that doesn't help their physical symptoms, and it doesn't help their grief. For medical professionals, one of the most useful things that you could actually do before sitting down and having a discussion with a young person with topics surrounding their chronic illness and their grief and how both of those things might be affecting their lives is to recognize with them verbally that you are not an expert in either of these things and you might say something wrong, but try and reassure them that you are coming from a place that cares and that wants to get this right. That might be recognizing that this isn't the best place to have this conversation if you're, for instance, having to have that conversation in a busy A&E department or on a ward with 4 other people in a bay and all you've got are the magic soundproof blue curtains to pull around. Recognize those things and verbalize them to that young person, because actually that can be one of the most powerful things you can do, because then you don't have to get it 100% right, but they will know that you are coming from the best place possible.
Yeah, I'd echo that. And I'd also, if you're not the right person and this is not the right place to have that conversation, it is also okay to leave it for the right person in the right place. Like, it's absolutely fine to include in their discharge letter like a link to Winston's Wish or direct them to someone who can help them in that way. You might not be an expert in that specific situation, and that is fine. No one is expecting you to be. But just acknowledging that you're not and that someone better might be able to do it is going to go a really long way to building that trust or not breaking that trust. I think the big one for me as well, that I don't think I'd planned for, like we talked a little bit about support networks last time, but I think the overlap between those medical situations and support networks is something that I don't think I was ready for. And like the power, and it's kind of two-sided, like for medical professionals listening, be aware of this. For support networks, also bear this in mind. The power that what a medical professional says has over those support networks is, I think, sometimes something that people don't always take into account. Like, if a young person is telling you one thing and the doctor says this is grief and they're just not coping with it very well, you're a parent, you're a teacher, you're a guardian, whatever, actually just having that young person's back for a minute and going, I believe you. You don't have to think that they're right. You don't have to, I mean, it would help if you did, but you don't have to. You don't have to sort of turn around and go, no, the doctor's wrong. Just to have someone go, you know what, I do believe you when you say that you don't think it's the only factor would have been so unbelievably helpful.
Being that support network for a grieving young person is hard. And then if you've got a grieving young person who's also dealing with chronic illness, like, it's hard on everybody. And I think that recognition for that young person can actually, as you said, it can go a long way, because it can be really lonely. A bit like with some of the stuff for the professionals, verbalizing it is really important, because you might be thinking it, but actually it being said out loud is a massive deal.
Yeah. Don't take until a young person goes, well, you're not listening, to go, well, I didn't think I had to say it. I thought you'd know because I'm your insert supportive person here. And I think it's so easy for a support network to make that worse, but also to make it so much easier just by thinking about that one thing. Like, I believe you, there's 3 words. And that would have made so much difference. Just hearing those 3 words from one person would have been, yeah, really changed how I felt about the whole situation.
Yeah.
I have been thinking about things that I wish I'd heard other than those 3 words, but also like things that were really unhelpful from support networks. And I think some of them from our conversations are things that we've probably both heard at different times / wished we'd heard. And I think if you're a support network listening, then, maybe it's helpful to avoid falling into traps. But also if you are a chronically ill, grieving young person listening, hopefully this bit helps you understand that you're not alone. They're very niche experiences that people around you might not be having, but there are people who understand. So I think the wildest thing I had was probably, well, you're still here, so stop wasting time thinking about it because it's making you ill. Because that was just wrong on so many levels. Because, like, number one, not helpful.
So,
Number two, it's not necessarily what's making me ill, but that attitude's certainly not helping.
I feel like a lot of the time right after I blocked out what people said to me. I genuinely think one of the worst things that when people used to say to me was, oh, that's never going to happen to you. For me, for some of my support networks, it was a bit like, do you understand the situations that I have been in and how poorly I was? And then some of it was just, it's never going to happen to you is just not helpful. It was really strange because it was like, well, yeah, it never should have happened to her either, but it did.
Which I think proves the point that if you don't know what to say, it's okay to say nothing. Or it's okay to say, you know what, this is so rubbish that I just don't know what to say.
Literally saying that's fine.
That's what we'd like to hear, is I don't have an answer and this is rubbish.
This is rubbish. Sometimes, especially when the grief is really fresh, trying to find a positive, it's just not helpful. She's in a better place was a truly interesting one that I think I had some truly unbroadcastable responses to.
Yeah. Well, I lost my friend to suicide and people went, at least she's not in pain anymore. And I was like, she shouldn't have been in pain here. You haven't, that's not reassuring. It just isn't.
For grieving young people, if they're grieving somebody who is also young, which unfortunately with chronic illness you might be, there often isn't really a positive to draw from it, and that's okay. There doesn't have to be. At that moment, don't think that's what's going to help them.
I think people have such a desire to make you feel better when you're grieving. And especially, again, when you're chronically ill, if that's causing you to feel iller for any, as a flare, as whatever, people want that more because they're like, well, if I just find the magic words, if I make them feel better, then everything will be better. They'll be happier. There isn't a magic combination of words. And when you're in the thick of grief, actually the only thing you want is to not be grieving. There isn't a set of magic words that exists in this world that can pull you out of that moment. And I think accepting that is something as humans we're not very good at doing because we want, humans like to problem solve. We want to fix things. We want to make people feel better.
Especially if it's someone you love, you want to be able to help them. It can be really difficult. But I think you don't have to say anything. But when I say you don't have to say anything, I don't mean don't talk to them.
Ignoring just as bad.
Yeah, and even if you think that you say, oh, well, I was trying to give you space, it's really easy for everybody to try to give you space, and then suddenly it's really lonely. You don't have to say anything because quite often it isn't a right thing to say, but be there for them. Do something that you know that is gonna help them. whether that's make them a meal they really like, or sit with them, watch their favorite show, something. But also don't expect them to go, oh my God, thank you. Because for a while I was so in my own head about everything that people were doing nice things, but I was just it was passing me by that they were doing them. But looking back, I know that those things did really help. So actually, sometimes it can be doing something for somebody.
Anger is such a big part of grief, especially when you combine it with chronic illness. Like, I was angry at myself, I was angry at my body, I was angry at my friend for having the audacity to die. Those are things that you don't expect from somebody. Like, I am not typically a particularly angry person, but being able to express that in a safe space stops it from boiling up inside you. And I think as a support network, being there for the person at whatever stage of grief they're at and however they want to address it or not address it, or talk about that person or not talk about that person, like being open for all of that is really important. The person is going to respond in ways that you probably haven't seen them before. That was a big thing for me, is I was like, I would not behave this way normally. I would not share these angry thoughts externally normally, but I'm grieving and all rules have gone out the window. And also, like, they're allowed to laugh. They're allowed to be happy. They're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to cry. Like, if you're supporting someone through that, especially if they're dealing with that kind of additional chronic illness bit where so much of it is lonely and isolating and difficult to understand, just letting them sound off in the way that works for them. It's okay to feel that way. It's okay to say those things. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to want to think of a funny memory and laugh.
Laughter is a massive part of being able to cope with grief, actually. And I think often it's chronically ill people. I mean, I had a dark sense of humour before my friend died, and then she died, and it was worse. Yeah, let them laugh, and definitely what you're saying about the anger. I am not an angry person, really, but I was really mad after she died. I was furious at so many things, and it wasn't really like me. And I think often for people around me who spent a lot of time with me because they were like helping to look after me, that was probably quite shocking for me to suddenly be really angry about it all. That non-judgmental listening ear can be more powerful than anything you can say.
Yeah. And a reminder that it's okay for them to be angry for a while. Like, okay, maybe if they undergo a fundamental personality change and it lasts for a really extended period of time, you're allowed to get concerned. But there are no rules for grieving in that first period. And there's also no rule on how long that first period lasts. It might be 2 weeks. It might be 2 months. It might be a year. Like, it's all just okay and flexible. And I think that is what I wish someone would have told me, was that at every point on that journey, it was okay to feel what I was feeling, especially when you're also juggling chronic illness and you're having to navigate what you have the energy and the physical capability for. And it is okay if that doesn't look the way you thought it should.
Yes, definitely. And if you're a support person who's thinking, well, they aren't following the grief timeline, if you've picked up at something that has a grief timeline on it, please throw it out the window, because grief doesn't have a timeline. There is no set timeline that everybody is going to follow, and expecting that is unrealistic of anybody and super unrealistic of someone with a chronic illness, where actually your chronic illness can affect your ability to process stuff. So yeah, it's not going to have a timeline how that person handles their grief. They might feel angry one day and sad the next and accepting the next, and then you're back to anger. That's normal for any young people listening. No, please know that that is normal, and for support systems, please know that that is normal. Like, there is no timeline.
Maybe we should finish with, if you've got one, a piece of advice for a professional or a support network having these kinds of conversations and kind of navigating grief and chronic illness with someone that they support. And then maybe something for a young person who's currently in these situations with medical professionals or support networks, where it's maybe slightly less ideal right now.
I would definitely say for support networks, for medical professionals, just take a moment and say what you're about to say in your head before it comes out your mouth. Because we can all trip up on our words and be a bit clumsy and say stuff that isn't great, but that can be really affecting for somebody who's going through grief. Say it to yourself first and go, yes, this is definitely what I'd like to say, because that is something so small that takes just a second that can have a really big impact.
Yeah, definitely. I think I would say, given I can't say exactly the same thing, but I 100% agree. I think I would say, like, obviously don't over stress about it, but do bear in mind that 10-second, 10-minute, however long interaction with that person may be just another part of your day, but for them that could be the defining moment in how they view their grief and their chronic illness. I just think an awareness of that responsibility without over stressing about it is always helpful. Like, you're going to make mistakes. You're human. We're all human. But understanding that role that you have and that responsibility you have, if you're not the right person to do it, don't force yourself to be. It's much better to hear, I can't help you with this, so I'm going to put you in touch with someone who can, than it is to hear a best guess and have it be wrong.
I think my advice to a young person probably follows on from what you've just said, in that if someone does say the wrong thing, know that it likely isn't from a malicious place. We're not good at talking about grief. That's part of the point of us doing this, and the point of the whole Grief in Common podcast. It's the point of Winston's Wish. But that also means that the people who are saying stuff to you aren't great at talking about it. Even if they should be, they're not. Give yourself a bit of a break about something someone has said to you if it's really upset you.
Definitely. I also think, like, allow yourself to feel things. So much of chronic illness is, especially in medical environments, having to be polite and having to put the right mask on so that you're taken seriously, but not so that you're undermined or underbelieved. And that balance is so tricky when you're not grieving. And sometimes you just need to sit behind one of those soundproof blue curtains and poke your tongue out after they've left the room, or like anything like that just allows you to acknowledge how frustrating it is. And, you know, eventually at some point, maybe it'll become something that you have a really dark sense of humor about. But it's also absolutely fine if in that particular moment, all you want to do is stick your tongue out at them after they've passed through that blue curtain. You're human.
Yes, and I kind of hope that this podcast will be a bit of a reassurance to people that you aren't the only one feeling those things, that there are so many of us that have had to deal with both chronic illness and grief. I think that hopefully we can be someone to say there is something on the other side, even when it all feels really, really overwhelming and really, really terrible. There is another side, and you will get there.
Unfortunately, this is our last of these grief and chronic illness episodes, and 2 definitely doesn't feel like enough to explore everything. But know that we hear you and we see you. Your experiences are so valid. Whether you're a professional, a support network, or a young person going through grief, there will be more information that you can find in the link in the description to this episode.
So thank you, Beth, for doing this with me. And I'd also like to say a big thank you to everyone who's been involved in this project, because this has not just been us two. We've done a lot of workshopping about these ideas all together.
Thank you so much, Ella, and thank you so much to the rest of the team. And thank you very much for listening to the Grief in Common podcast.
This podcast is brought to you by Talk Grief, powered by Winston's Wish, the UK's first children and young people's bereavement charity.
Listen to young people from different backgrounds have honest conversations about their grief and experiences.
You might hear us laugh, cry, and everything in between.
We hope that these conversations give you the confidence to talk about your own grief.
If you're grieving and over the age of 13, this podcast is suitable for you, and we hope it helps you feel less alone.
From teenagers to young adults, students to young professionals, we're all different, but we've all got grief in common. Thank you.